Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition.
Hello and welcome to Labor Vision, the at-home edition. I'm your host, Erica Hammond, and joining me today to talk about a very important issue that is affecting not only our state, but our entire country, is both Kristina Contreras-Fox from the Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness, and Alex West from the SouthCoast Fair Housing, and Autumn Guillotte from the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I know that all of our viewers who are watching, they all are very familiar with the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, but thank you so much for joining us for the first time, Autumn. It's great to have you here. And
I'm
then
excited.
as for both Kristina and Alex, I know this is both of your first times as well, so I'm really excited about that. But I know that we haven't ever had someone on from SouthCoast Fair Housing or from the Coalition to End Homelessness, the Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness. So I'd like to just start off by having each of you kind of give a little bit of a background about your organizations so that viewers are more familiar with them.
Sure, and thank you. I'm happy to start. So thanks, Kristina Contreras-Fox. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at the Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness. We recently changed our name. We were formerly the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, but we feel like this new name change is more in line with the work that we do and also the way that we want to do that work. So we are a dynamic coalition that works together to create and advance lasting solutions that end and prevent homelessness. And we envision a state where no Rhode Islander experiences homelessness. We do this work through four main ways. So one is systems transformation, like the homelessness system here in Rhode Island. We want homelessness to be rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And when people are experiencing this, they have a way to get help. So we oversee the Homeless Management Information System, which is the statewide database of folks experiencing homelessness, so we can get an idea of, all right, how many people are calling our shelter hotline? What are the needs that people have? Who is it? Like, are there families? Is it unaccompanied minors? So like, there are kids even today who are calling these shelter hotlines trying to get help. We also oversee the coordinated entry system, which is if you are experiencing homelessness or you're on the brink of, or you know someone who might need that help, you would tell them to call coordinated entry. So before you would go and call all different shelters, but now this is something that's mandated by HUD. It's the federal department that oversees housing, excuse me. Coordinated entry is this sort of like one door, one-way entry gateway into the whole homelessness system. And it's this number. There's also a form online that you can fill out. And so through coordinated entry, we help people access shelter and also access emergency housing services. And then also we work with our partners. We have a lot of different people within our coalition, a lot of shelter providers like House of Hope and Crossroads. We work with other agencies like the Rhode Island Community Food Bank and Sojourner House, excuse me, to help Rhode Islanders. But also, and this is where I do the most work, we engage in policy and advocacy, and we also work with constituents. And this is what I get to do and what is really important to me, being the bridge, and the bridge is the coalition here. We need to be the bridge between people who are creating policy and people who are impacted by policy. So that way, the lived expertise and experience of folks who have been through it, who are living it now, who know exactly in and out why this is failing, what people need, and how to provide that, right? Like that needs to be centered. That always needs to be the foundation really for any policy discussion. Because if that's not present, if there's that disconnect, policies getting made in a vacuum, and that doesn't help anybody because it's not grounded in reality. Or if it does, it helps a very select few folks who probably just were you gave them a little bit of a nudge, they'd be fine anyway, right? Like, I think that's been true for our policy in lots of different areas. But in Rhode Island, we're seeing that come through in housing in really, really scary and awful ways. And one of those being the rising number of people experiencing homelessness in the state. And the Coalition for the Homeless is trying to address this, you know, in a multifaceted way. But really, we need the most important thing that we need is more policy to get passed that's going to address root causes and help folks like fundamentally and comprehensively. And by that I mean all of us, because all of us need housing. It's a human right.
Thank you, Kristina.
I'm Alex West. I'm a staff attorney at SouthCoast Fair Housing. I'm licensed in Massachusetts. So SouthCoast Fair Housing, we're a nonprofit, but a private organization, also funded in part by Housing and Urban Development, so HUD. We provide fair housing services across the whole state of Rhode Island, and then also Bristol and Plymouth counties in Massachusetts. And our mission is really just to eradicate housing discrimination, to increase equal housing opportunities, and through that help developing inclusive communities. And so we provide information, we do trainings, like to anyone who wants to hear us about fair housing. We also counsel and advocate for people who've experienced housing discrimination so we can represent somebody. We also conduct enforcement activities, so that might include like investigating housing discrimination. And then finally, we can pursue, you know, legal remedies as applicable for that to enforce the Fair Housing Act.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm glad you just mentioned the Fair Housing Act. I want to start from the beginning. I know we have a lot of topics to talk about this segment, but do you want to just start by briefly talking about the Fair Housing Act?
Sure, yeah. So just super briefly, from the 1968 Civil Rights Act. So the Fair Housing Act was enacted just a few days, I believe like a week after Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered. So this was really a long struggle that folks, especially people of color, had fought for a long, long time, including veterans who returned from, you know, World War II and then had, you know, funding, but nobody would sell housing to them. No one would let them use the mortgages or even qualify for mortgages based on the color of their skin. So again, a long fought battle, and I think it's always important to mention. And fair housing, which is part of that Civil Rights Act, is the right to choose housing free from unlawful discrimination. So there's federal, state, and local laws that protect people from discrimination in housing transactions, and this includes rentals, sales, lending, and insurance. And through that, there are protected classes. So protected class is a group of people with a common characteristic who are legally protected from discrimination on the basis of that characteristic. So I just want to name quickly that some of these, especially federally, are race, color, national origin, religion, sex, gender, and now that includes sexual orientation and gender identity, disability, and the presence of children under the age of 18 or pregnancy in the family. And so those are protected classes really no matter where you go in the US. And then Rhode Island has added a few more, including military and veteran status and marital status, and now the source of income discrimination, which I know you're going to ask about next.
Thank you very much. So just like you said, yes, I know the first topic we really want to talk about is the major legislative win that was just signed into law last month, which Kristina, you had mentioned was actually Fair Housing Month. So the month of May is Fair Housing Month, and during that month, the housing discrimination based on source of income legislation was passed. So do you want to talk a little bit about that campaign, what it means for Rhode Islanders? I know it was, this year was probably going on its 5th year that folks were working on it. You need to talk a little bit about the legislation. Any of you?
Absolutely, yeah, happy to. So this is a huge win. Big thank you to our legislative champions. This was sponsored by Chairwoman Anastasia Williams in the House, and Senator Megan Coleman. And excuse me, got a little frog in my throat, but Chairwoman Williams had been the sponsor all of these long years. And yeah, this is year number 5 that had been introduced and advocated for. So this is certainly a long time coming. And source of income discrimination is a really simple but very poisonous concept. The person in question, the potential tenant, has the money to pay. They can afford the apartment. That's not a problem whatsoever. Their money comes from a lawful source, right? They're not jewel thieves giving the landlord a sack of cash, right? They have a lawful source of income. And the landlord says, yeah, okay, I know you can afford this. I know you got a way to pay for it. And all of that's great, but I don't like the way you're going to be paying me. I don't like how your money's going to be coming to me. So I'm not going to rent to you. And this discrimination effectively shut out 93% of voucher holders from 93% of rental units that would otherwise be affordable and available to them in our state.
Wow.
And I can tell you that, like, unbelievably awful statistic, thanks to the work of SouthCoast Fair Housing, who conducted this really comprehensive, thorough, and devastating study on the impact of source of income discrimination in our state. Because one of the challenges in all of the years of advocating for it was this continued belief from some pretty key leaders that source of income discrimination didn't exist. Rhode Island's got plenty. The Fair Housing Act is so strong. You know, this isn't a big deal. And besides, like, people have options. If that person doesn't like it, then there's always another landlord. And no, that's not the case. And we could see that in cold, hard numbers, but also in the really poignant and powerful stories of folks who experienced SOI discrimination or saw a loved one go through it and go through that struggle in finding housing. They came, and I mean, those folks telling their stories, making their voices heard, I mean, coming and testifying in committee, but also doing the hard work of like consistently calling and talking with legislators and like going to the state house when we could go to the state house, right, when it was safe to, talk with people face to face, you know, like getting their neighbors and their community members involved and getting more folks into this fight, because SOI discrimination always got framed, well, it got framed mostly in terms of this is something that housing choice voucher holders go through, which is absolutely true. Excuse me. There's so much discrimination and stigma that comes along with having a housing choice voucher, but that is, and I mean, that was a huge issue, because with housing choice vouchers, I mean, some of them, you have them and you don't lose them if you can find housing, but there are quite a few of these types of supports where if you don't use it, you lose it. And it can take years, decades even, for people just to get on the list to wait for one of them.
Right.
In the meantime, these are families, these are our seniors, these are like folks, like regular folks, right? Like everyday Rhode Islanders who are doing everything that they can to be able to provide basic resources for themselves and their families the way we all would, who are forced to like wait for that in cars, in tents, split up into shelters, right? Like making unbelievable sacrifices just to like keep things okay.
Right.
That was the reality. And if you have this voucher and you can't, I mean, imagine getting the door slammed in your face constantly, simply because the moment that you say, oh, I'll be paying with a voucher. But that was not only happening to voucher holders, housing choice voucher holders, but also folks who have a disability and their main source of income is SSI or SSDI or one of the other types of income supports that is available to folks to help them pay for basic needs. And so this was really a trap that was keeping people in the cycle of experiencing homelessness. And it's so important that got taken off. But this came as a result, like I said, of so many incredible advocates relentlessly organizing and working together and sharing stories. But it also took that strong collaboration and like that relentlessness and the tenacity that it really takes to be able to like move legislation forward in our state. And that was a really special thing to be a part of. And I think that is now like the blueprint for how we like work on these housing issues, because housing is something that impacts literally every single person. So making sure we work together is essential for us to continue to have these victories.
Absolutely. Now, I know that although this was a major win, there's still plenty more that needs to be done in the housing realm in Rhode Island. So can you guys briefly talk about some other anti-discrimination legislation that is currently introduced in Rhode Island?
I was going to say, Alex, do you want to tackle this question? I got a couple I could tick off quick, but
well, sure. I'll just mention that I think, Erica, sometimes folks don't even know what protections are already in place. So something like familial status discrimination, which is prohibited by like the federal law and in Rhode Island, folks maybe don't know. It's a funny kind of sounding word, right? But what it means is you can't, like a landlord can't not rent to somebody because of the presence of a child under the age of 18. We see this sometimes where someone will say like no children in an ad, which is against both, federal and Rhode Island laws, but this definitely happens. And it could also be like if somebody is pregnant, sometimes the landlord will say like, oh, I don't think this, place is big enough for you to have a baby, which is usually not true. Zoning laws are what dictate whether or not a place is, big enough for a family. And so definitely if that happens, please reach out to us or to the Rhode Island Commission for Human Rights just to find out what your rights are, because that kind of thing really irks me that we already have a law that protects people, but folks don't know about it. And then I think, there are other protected classes that we're looking to add that other municipalities and states have added, such as that folks can't be discriminated against because of their immigration status. So that's some potential legislation. So that would be like, a landlord can't say, well, if you don't show me your proof of citizenship, then you can't rent here, which obviously is a problem, especially we have families of mixed citizenship status. So they're effectively denied when there are rules like this. So I don't know, Kristina, if you want to expand a little bit on some.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mention. First of all, thank you very much for talking about like what rights folks have and what that looks like and how to exercise them, because I think discrimination based on familial status happens a lot in Rhode Island. I mean, there was recently a lawsuit that was decided in favor of plaintiffs, I think last month, found that in Providence, there were some landlords who were engaging in that very type of discrimination. But also, I mean, so the Fair Housing Act was a landmark piece of legislation, but states can decide and should continue to address the issue of housing discrimination locally, because I mean, every state is different, excuse me, and needs of communities are different, and like policy should respond to those needs. So housing discrimination is a great example. So Alex, the bill that you just raised about prohibiting landlords from inquiring about a tenant's immigration status, that's been introduced this year. That's a really important bill that the End Homelessness testified in support of. There's also, and I think it's pertinent, Happy Pride Month. So sexual orientation, you can't lose your housing, be discriminated in housing because of your sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression in Rhode Island. But there was a little exception which said that if you are a landlord, occupied unit with 3 units or less, then you can engage in that type of discrimination without being penalized. And this year, Senator Coleman, who was also the Senate sponsor for the SOI bill, introduced that. And I cannot remember who the House sponsor is, and I apologize, but this is a really important piece of legislation. You might not think that if you're not queer, if you're not in the housing world, but if you think about how many triple deckers do we have in this state?
Right.
Owner occupied 3 unit or less triple deckers exist, in Rhode Island. Alex, I think you were making this point the other day. And when you think about it in that context, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, this is causing people to not be able to access housing for an absolutely awful, meaningless reason.
Right.
Like discrimination is just absolute. I mean, it makes no sense, right? Like, I mean, I know, well, I'm not trying to like downplay it, but like when you really think about it, it's not a reason at all. That's the injustice of it. It's so arbitrary and ignorant. It's like despicable. And this is something that like plays out in a real awful way in folks' lives every single day.
It's simply anti-LGBTQ, right?
Right. And I'll just add to that, because of the federal protections and the protection of Rhode Island, if you're seeking a bed in a shelter, these laws also apply. So we sometimes see gender segregated shelters, and you're allowed to get housing in a shelter that matches the gender identity with which you identify. So if you identify as a woman and there's a spot in a women's shelter, you deserve and can protectedly be there. So just want to make sure that's clear too, because we often get questions like that, and especially it's tough, if you're gender non-conforming or non-binary, and there's maybe not a space for you. So just a shout out for encouragement to make more spaces for people who maybe don't fit into one of those binary categories, but you are protected based on the gender you identify as in Rhode Island and federally.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you. And then, so I know that another major problem, really probably the largest problem that we're seeing across the country, specifically in Rhode Island, is a lack of housing. So absolutely, we need all of this anti-discrimination legislation, but like I know that you had mentioned, Kristina, in our last conversation, if you don't have enough housing, the anti-discrimination laws can't even be used, right? So we need to figure out a way to get more housing in the state. So can you tell me about can you just give us an idea of how many Rhode Islanders are currently both on the shelter waiting list, are waiting for affordable housing?
Definitely. So thank you. That's a really important question. So you think of like addressing our housing crisis as a stool. Like we need to ensure that people have access. We need to ensure that it's fair. We need to ensure that it's affordable, et cetera. But we also need to ensure that it exists. And we do not have enough housing, period, in Rhode Island. And that scarcity, so many problems are arising from that, including not only like lack of housing, but lack of even basic shelter. So right now, and as I mentioned before, the Coalition to End Homelessness, we oversee the statewide shelter hotline, where people call to get emergency shelter and emergency housing resources. In the past week, as of the past week, we know that there were over 660 people waiting for shelter that's about 400 households. And this year, in terms of like going to housing, there were 225 people between the 1st of January to the end of May who were referred to a housing subsidy by coordinated entry. Of those 225 people, 87 of them were approved, 35 of them moved in, and 61 are still waiting, pending approval of a unit. 61 people waiting for, for months, some of them for half a year. I mean, that's too long. And this is just a snapshot of like the folks who are able to access the system, like who can easily like get to a phone and like have a strong internet connection and like are fluent in English and all of these things that might sound silly as they come out of my mouth, but these are real, like in terms of this, like these are things that help, these are privileges that help people be able to access resources, which that shouldn't be the case. And the way that we address that is not by necessarily building more shelter, it's by building more housing, because you can't make $1 out of 15 cents. If you have 100 households, but only 51 available and affordable homes, that means 49 families aren't going to have a place to live. Right. That's literally the situation here in Rhode Island. And the lower your income, the worse this is. But we're even at a place where if you're making $60,000 a year, you're still going to be cost burdened when you're looking to rent. You're still not making enough to even be able to comfortably afford, like not be cost burdened, meaning you're spending over a third of your income on housing on a 2-bedroom apartment. Like there are a lot, I mean, we need to ensure that because discrimination does play a role in like keeping people away from housing, from being able to access housing. That's been true for decades. Systemic racism is a root cause of homelessness. But it's all, this paired with the fact that there is no housing, and the housing that exists, the affordable housing that exists, is run down, it's deteriorating, unfit for human habitation, but people are still forced to pay like $900 a month for these types of places only to face eviction, get evicted, experience homelessness, try to find another place again. The only place that will rent to them is a similarly horrible, property with an absentee landlord, and the cycle starts again and again and again. And the scenario for literally thousands of people across our state, hundreds and hundreds more each year. And the pandemic has only made that worse. So right now, there is a bill that's been introduced. This was also included in the governor's budget. We create a dedicated funding stream solely for the production and preservation of affordable housing. Rhode Island's literally the only state in our entire region, from like Maine to Delaware, that doesn't have this. And you can see, especially in our neighbors, especially in Connecticut and Massachusetts, their rates of homelessness are going down, and they're investing more and more in building housing. Like, in order for us to be able to address this issue, we have to address our lack of supply first. Or like, we can do lots of things at the same time, but that absolutely needs to be like front and center. Because without that, just putting Band-Aids on broken legs.
Exactly. And I just want to piggyback off of that. Like, the more we invest in housing in the state, the more we're also investing in workers, twofold, right? Like, we're talking about literally building jobs. By creating more housing, you're also creating work to build that housing. But there's also a direct correlation with people facing homelessness and also facing job loss. Like, how are you going to be seeking a job when you also don't have a house to shower in, or to phone, or to recharge, or that mental toll of not having housing security also affects work performance and leads to significant loss of wages. So it's really important that we get this through on so many levels.
Absolutely. And I know that you already mentioned this, Kristina, but I just want to reiterate quickly, what exactly could a permanent funding stream or permanent funding for fair housing in Rhode Island look like? I know that you said that there's already legislation in this year to add this into the governor's budget.
Yes. What a very glamorous thing, which is the real estate conveyance tax. Hello. So the way that the revenue for our funding stream will be created is through a tax increase in the real estate conveyance tax. I forget the percentage, but I know that it is a tax on the sale of all commercial properties, $750,000 or more. This is a really, really common mechanism for generating revenue in this way. This is the way that pretty much all of the other states who have this in their budget are doing it. I mean, no, I'm not here hating on people's success, but I know very few working class people who are consistently who have a big portfolio of $750,000 commercial properties, to the point where they have a strong enough opinion on the real estate conveyance tax. But I know literally hundreds, and there are literally thousands of working folks and folks who are unable to work that have no access to housing and are finding their ability to access housing become harder and harder and harder every year. Is Autumn, thank you very much for bringing up the connection between having your job and being able to meet your basic needs, which we always say you can't do one without the other, but you really can't. I mean, if you are wondering where am I going to sleep at night? Am I going to have clean water to drink? Where am I going to be able to use the bathroom? Where's my next meal coming from? It's really hard to concentrate at work, let alone be able to, show up at 8 o'clock every single day, fresh and ready to go. But also too, so many folks are working and it's just not enough to be able to pay the bills. And I mean, we need, that's why it's so fantastic. And it's so important that the General Assembly passed the increase to our minimum wage. I mean, we need to see living wages here in our state, because otherwise people are just never going to be able to make ends meet. But right now, for in extremely low income households in Rhode Island, over 40% of them, at least one adult is working full time. So it's let's make sure that people, because that gap between wages and the cost of living and the cost of housing especially, that widening gap is one of the core reasons people experience homelessness. And so let's make sure our policy is addressing that, and it can be addressed by creating this consistent funding, so they're consistently building housing, but also making sure that, you know, if people are working, and if people can't work, they're able to access resources that just let them be able to do what it is they need to do to be able to live.
Absolutely. And I know that we are just about out of time, and we could have so many more segments specifically on this, and that's exactly what we intend to do, right, Autumn? We are planning on having more segments on addressing the housing crisis in Rhode Island. So I just want to quickly, before we close, give all three of you guys the opportunity to add anything that you'd like before we end this segment.
Sure. So I'll just say, in terms of, you know, fair housing at SouthCoast Fair Housing, you know, you can go to southcoastfairhousing.org to read about some of your rights, especially, you know, whether you're renting, looking to buy, or maybe, you know, you're becoming a first-time homeowner, perhaps in a multifamily, and you're going to be renting to other people. Come learn what your rights or your obligations are if you are going to be, you know, a landlord, or if you're looking, you know, to maybe rent somewhere new. We have materials, whether you have a disability or you want to see what your, you know, rights are in terms of this new source of income legislation. So come check us out. We also always are looking for part-time testers. So fair housing testing is kind of like secret shopping, where we give you a little bit of a backstory and you approach a landlord with trying to, where you approach a landlord, you know, to say, look, I am somebody, you know, with a small child and I want to rent here. And then you write up what happened, and then we see if there is a pattern of discrimination. So anyway, we're always looking for people to perform that role. And it's actually, we do pay for that. It's very part-time work, so not a full-time job at all. But if anybody is interested, you can check it out at southcoastfairhousing.org, and we've got a how to become a tester link there. So we'd appreciate anybody who wants to help in that endeavor.
Thank you.
What I'll say is just, I mean, if these are issues that are important to you, if these are issues you want to see move, if you want to see Rhode Island take real steps to address our housing crisis and make sure that no one experiences homelessness and every single one of us has a safe place to go to at night, talk to your elected officials. Now is the time. So we have a part-time legislature, January to June, and now we're coming into which means right now we're coming into the final stretch. A lot of decisions get made right now. And especially when it comes to the issues we've been talking about today, like the funding stream, that's included in the governor's budget. And that's exactly what the General Assembly is going to be debating for the next several weeks, very closely and very intensely. So now is a great time. I mean, it's always great. I encourage everybody to consistently and constantly talk to your elected officials, pester politicians, make your voice heard. But now is really, really an essential time, an important time to pick up the phone or, you know, send an email, excuse me, to take action because they want to know. And it's relatively easy to get involved and to take action. If you go to the Coalition for the Homeless website, which is rihomeless.org, you'll see policy and advocacy. Click on that, and that will take you, give you some more information about some of these really important bills. And this issue overall, but also will lead you to some really fast and easy ways that you can contact your legislator, make your voice heard. You can take action and help advance these really important bills, these really important policy initiatives. So yeah, make your voice heard in a democracy.
Thank you, Kristina.
For having me.
All right. Autumn, would you like to add anything?
I'll take this time to just plug our new social media. The Rhode Island AFL-CIO is now on Instagram, and you can follow us at RIAFL-CIO. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. We're going to be putting out a lot more information on these issues as well. So to support everything we talked about today, you'll be able to see it laid out in text form.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us on Labor Vision. I'm really excited to continue having this conversation on Labor Vision in the coming weeks. There'll be some more segments on the housing crisis in Rhode Island. So thank all three of you for being a part of Labor Vision today. And for those of you who are watching from home, thank you so much for watching Labor Vision. We look forward to seeing you again here soon. And if you've missed any of this segment, you can check it out at laborvisionri.org. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.